Okay. Hey, everyone. Oh, wait, just a sec. Not yet, not yet.
Stage picture. I got some water. Thank you very much.
Are we ready now? We're ready. Okay, good stuff. Thank you, everybody, for coming to here.
Hey, how you doing? Want to check in with you for just a minute.
Nice.
Oh, anyway, that's Dave.
Hi, this is Mitch. Mitch, give us the 1-minute version of your incredibly long and illustrious history.
It's the reason I'm here today is because my beard is gray. And that's the answer. Thank you very much. Good night. And to some people, gray means you actually know something. So let's see. I started in paper and pencil role-playing games back in the Stone Age. Okay, good. And then after that, I started freelancing. My first game was a Sony PlayStation 1 first wave title. And then after that, I did a couple of children's games. Does anybody know what Sillywood games are? Anybody? Bueller? No? Sillywood, this is when CD-ROMs were invented. And the idea was you did these like movie games, like Night Trap. Oh, yeah. Right? So I did that. I did the Arnold Schwarzenegger Eraser video game.
Nice.
That's part of my scar tissue that you'll get used to. So after doing Sillywood games, then my old friend Jordan Weisman said, hey, come create a new IP with me. And we created something called Crimson Skies.
Very good.
Not for Arnold Schwarzenegger, but for Crimson Skies. That's good. And then after Crimson Skies, then I did something called the Mech Commander series. And that's where I got into this whole BattleTech thing. So I did three Mech Commander games. Then that company got bought by Microsoft, went to Microsoft. Now I remember my own damn history.
Yes.
And did first game for the Xbox Live console, not the console, Xbox Live platform, and that was called Mech Assault. And that's the first game where you could actually play against each other and talk. And the very first thing I said online during the first test was, I'm not wearing pants. And so this is my part of gaming history right here. And then after that, I became studio manager. That's before Microsoft Game Studios actually officially sort of started. And then I became a studio manager for Microsoft Game Studios for a studio called Fassa Studio. That's where we did more Crimson Skies, which was originally a PC game and a board game. You said the 1 minute. I just realized how damn old I was.
That's okay. We'll give you an extra minute.
Yeah. All right. One more minute. And then I ran Xbox Live Arcade, and that's where David and I started working together. Right? And that was during the heyday of Xbox Live Arcade with the Summer of Arcade. Castle Crashers came out that year.
Yep.
Raid came out that year. It was a really good year. And then, let's see. Oh, and then after that, left Microsoft, founded a studio with my old friend Jordan called Harebrained Schemes. And that was 7 years ago. After some consulting with Bungie. Bungie is the one who actually put us... 7 years already? It's been 7 years in April.
Wow.
And so we started out doing some mobile titles and then did something called Shadowrun Returns, which was a Kickstarter game. Raised over $1 million on Kickstarter, and that's what started this whole train rolling. Did 3 Shadowrun games, a game called Golem Arcana, which connected mobile devices to little minis. And this is a storied freaking career.
Yeah,
it's really irritating to me right now. And then, and then we recently shipped a game called BattleTech. And that's part of the whole Mech Warrior franchise.
Good.
Oh, good. You've heard of it. Hey. And then a couple months ago, our company got acquired by Paradox Interactive out of Sweden.
Yes.
And so that brings us to today. Was that for Paradox? One for Paradox. They're Swedes. They're not here. The hell with those people. No, I appreciate
it. So hold on. So before we dive into the conversation, I just want to understand our audience better. Can you raise your hand if you work for a game developer? If you're actually developing games? Okay, cool. If you work for a publisher, but you don't develop games, raise your hand.
Okay, got one and two.
And then, I guess, service providers like ad companies and stuff like that?
Hiya.
Okay. Okay, cool.
If you're a lawyer?
And then,
all right, that's that one. All right.
We got
now we know where the lawyers are.
All right. Okay, good. So
Great.
Now we know. So we got mostly developers. Cool.
All right, cool.
All All right. So, well, since it's mostly developers, let's start with this, Mitch.
Yeah. Sorry. I should be talking to you.
What's the most painful mistake of your career, and what did you learn from it?
Fuck you, man. That's your opening.
It's my opening.
Son of a bitch. Most painful mistake was taking the wrong job.
That's a good
This
one.
is the classic sliding doors. I had a choice between, this was at Microsoft, I could start a new sort of studio where I would induct college students in, teach them how to create games by making little things, and then shuffling them off to people like 343. I could do that, or I could go to this other nascent studio and make games myself.
Yeah.
And but they weren't games I wanted to make. And so I had a choice whether to train college students or to actually make games, and I made the wrong choice. And I agonized over that choice for a long time. And yeah, I made thoroughly the wrong choice, and yet it still brought me here today, so screw it, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Because those choices, how long does a bad choice last? Well, I don't know. Maybe that's the wrong answer, but...
It just depends on the situation.
Yeah.
But let me ask you this, because I bet you it's relevant to some of the people here. Is it always the wrong choice to take a job where you're making games you're not excited about? Do you think you should always choose to do something else? Or do you think there are situations in which, you know what, sometimes you need to take that job?
No, that's a great question. I think the answer is what can you learn from the experience? And the one constant in my life, above all else, is I'm constantly learning. Always, always learning. I've rarely attempted the same genre twice. And in terms of just working in different organizations and stuff like that, it's amazing how much you can learn from assholes. It is absolutely staggering. If you want to learn how to run a game studio, go work for somebody who doesn't know how. That is, you get it? It's an amazing learning experience of how not to treat people, how to demotivate people, how to make people question every decision they make, etc. Right? You know what I mean? How to unempower the hell out of them. I've learned that 10 ways to Sunday.
Yeah, I bet.
Oh yeah.
Let's talk about the reverse of it, though. Like, what's the best way to empower the people in your studio? Like, what are the tactics that you use to make sure that everyone in your studio is operating at the absolute maximum of their capability?
The number one thing that I've learned is to explain the goal of what you're doing. This is what we're after and why. It's all about the why, right?
Yes.
If people understand what they're after, why, who the audience is, what are the inputs that are going into your thinking, then they can start applying their own judgment. And that's the learning, right? If people are just stuck in this, you ever hear of mushroom management? You just keep people in the dark and shit on them once in a while? No? Just
I've never heard of that.
Oh, well, I learned that from somebody the hard way. No, but that's... Actually, I got something to say here, I guess, today. But yeah, that's the deal. In order to empower people, you actually have to give them tools to use great judgment. And I've been hiring people since I'm 22 years old, and I am no longer 22 years old. And that's the thing that I look for in a team member, right, is judgment and emotional intelligence, right? Those are the two.
Yeah. By the way, it was the first thing you said on the topic of make sure people understand what they're doing and why, like what they're trying to create, is super fascinating to me. In part because I can't remember when it was. I feel it was like about a year ago. A big study came out. They'd done a big survey of lots of different studios, successful and not successful, this and that.
Yeah.
And they were trying to use statistical tools to figure out what were the factors that contributed to making a game successful.
Yeah.
And one of the biggest factors was, do the people making the game all feel like they understand what they're making and are all on the same page? It is amazing how often that kills games.
Oh, yeah. Oh, it's a big, not only that, it doesn't just kill games, it kills game developers, right? You're working in a studio and it feels like people are working at cross purposes. Yeah. That's probably because people don't understand what the purpose is in the first place. So my partner, Jordan, who's a very wise, even older man, much older from my point of view, he says that the audience can tell that the team was smiling when they made the game, right? So the atmosphere of your studio, to me, is of critical importance. That's all part of the empowerment. It's part of everything.
Yeah, that makes sense. So okay, so we talked a little bit about empowering people. How about in terms of like, let's talk just for, I don't want to turn this into a whole conversation about crunch, but let's talk a little bit about that. Like sometimes, obviously,
crunch, I've heard of it.
Yeah, exactly. Obviously, there are times where you're like, oh my God, everything is on fire. We have to work extra hours.
Yeah.
And there's obviously a lot of evidence that you do that too much and you destroy your studio.
Yeah.
Where, like, you've been doing this for a long time. Where have you found the balance to be? Like, what are your thoughts on how you should crunch, if at all? How long you should crunch, if at all?
Yeah. First of all, systemic crunch is evil.
Yes.
Right, we got that. Systemic crunch is evil. Non-systemic crunch can be incredibly fun and cool and good for a product and a team if the goals are right in the first place. We started Harebrained Schemes 7 years ago with an incredible crunch. We made a game on a bet that in 12 weeks we couldn't make a really solid, like, award-winning game. That was the bet with Harold Ryan, who was the CEO at the time of Bungie. And so we just game jammed for 12 weeks. Now, game jamming for a weekend is cool. Game jamming for 12 weeks, that's something, right? That was like, all right, we're going to get in at, 8:30, 9 o'clock, we'll work till midnight or 1, and we'll just keep doing that, until we just absolutely drop. And then it was actually one of Apple's benchmark games of the year, so F you, Harold. So, and I'm not from the, so unfortunately I was raised wrong. Let's just get that out of the way now. I was raised wrong that, crunch is simply a part of the game business, right? That's just part of it. And I don't want it to be that way. It's not that way in the studio anymore. If we crunch, it is because we made a mistake. Planning to crunch, wrong. If we made a mistake and we say, hey, look, we're up against it, and we explain why, and here's the mistake we made that got here, that's one thing. Or if it's good, but in order to get it to be great, we need to do this. Are you with me, right? And then for us, the way we do it is we do 2-week crunches only. And instead of working late, we work early. So we get in at 8 o'clock in the morning, right? In an attempt to get out in enough time that you can get home to your families and feel like you actually have a life.
Nice.
So that's the way that we do it now,
So
but that's evolved over time.
It's not even Uber crunch. It's still going home. It's not like, oh, I'm in the office.
I don't believe in it. I think it's bullshit. I've seen it so many times that people think they're crunching because they've had dinner at work, and then that dinner they're talking over dinner, and they're not actually. You should, at the very least, eat at your desk and do your thing so you can get out of here and get the work done. But a lot of time it's hanging out complaining about crunch.
That's right. That's right. And pretending, right? Like, you'll have situations where people feel like, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, I feel like I've seen this many times, where you have someone who's like, all right, I have to be here for 14 hours today, but I know I can't stay here for 14 hours and work that entire time and actually remain a sane human being, so I'm going to take a couple breaks, but it'll be okay because I'm going to still work way more hours than normal. But it's not like they're timing themselves. So next thing you know, they wasted 3 hours on Twitter and might as well have been home with their families.
Yes, and happier. Right, and rested and more productive and stuff like that. Now there are times, and the hardest thing, one of the hardest things is there's almost nothing worth than the equal treatment of unequals, right? Where the entire studio, you tell them everybody crunch, when in fact it's these 3 people that are really the critical path people that need to crunch. Right. So letting those other people go and saying to these people, all right, look, we know you guys have to crunch. I make breakfast for them, literally, like I make, what do they call it? Oh, eggs. It's a little harder up here, to find words. But yeah, so, I'll scramble some eggs for them in the morning. I'll get their lunch for them. I'll do whatever it takes to support them and then get them out as fast as possible. But the equal treatment of unequals is a bad thing. Yeah,
we also, by the way, we try to keep it to, like, for us, it's like 2-3 weeks. Is kind of the absolute maximum we want to ever see ourselves crunching. And speaking of calling it a mistake, I don't know if you use this specific tactic or not, but not only do we call it a mistake, but we specifically make an effort every single time we have to crunch to call it a failure of management. So it's like, I have to own it. I don't have a choice. I can't be like, we made a mistake, guys, but by we I mostly mean you. No, it's like, no, this is my fault, and I'm sorry, and my ego is taking a hit right now, but I need us to crunch due to my mistake. So that's something that we've adopted rhetorically to hopefully reduce the likelihood that we'll ask people to crunch when they don't need to.
Yeah, I was raised, again, wrong. And one of the things, that I saw, the truth is, one of the studio managers that trained me was really Mr. Toxic Masculinity.
Okay.
Right? Like, woo! Every analogy this guy would make was a war analogy, right? We got to take that hill. Oh man, all that kind of crap. It was ungodly. And so crunch was a very manly thing to do, right? We're all in this together. We're all in the same, foxhole together?
Yeah.
All that kind of, fuck you, man. I wasn't drafted, I'm actually here getting paid.
Right.
Anyway. Yeah, so, that's crunch.
Okay, so I have a totally unrelated question for you. I'm curious, like at this point you've done, and this is nice because there's not a lot of people who can say this, you've done wildly original stuff.
Yes.
That is not based on a highly known IP. Although you have, there's Jordan, so we can talk about that. But and then you've done stuff that's obviously rooted in really, really popular IPs, at least with that have a strong niche audience. And I'm curious, like you've done both. Is there one that you like more? Is there one that in particular you would recommend more to the audience given today's market?
Well, all right, that's interesting. Well, as our last panelists were talking about, there's that work for hire versus the original IP. So I like the original because I can own it. And that's cool because that's how you add true value to your studio. It's not just a matter of can we do this stuff, it's are we actually worth something. The blank page is a fascinating thing, right? And trying to fulfill an unmet need, right, is rare air. You really get a chance to really try something new. And what I've discovered is I've done it several times now, and being the first to something is exhilarating and it's energizing and it's cost me a lot of money, because the market wasn't ready for it.
Yeah.
And that's happened several times. So
how do you minimize the risk of that?
One risk at a time. Like in the case of this game we made called Golem Arcana, we had this beautiful, this lovely technology, lovely mechanic that would connect these beautiful miniature figures, like Warhammer 40K figures. It would connect them to the game board, to a mobile app, right, through not RFID, the infrared. It was just these little invisible microdots. And you'd use a stylus and you click the figure and then you'd click the board and you say, I want to do this. And the app would figure everything out. It was absolutely lovely. That was the area to take the risk. What not to do is take the risk on the IP as well. So then was like, oh, now we'll create a game world. It's like, oh, great. Now I have to like the game world and like the technology. So it's one risk at a time. So that's my motivation, or my way of doing it.
We've struggled with that so much over the history of Spry Fox. It sounds like it's the same thing, like where we'll do 3 major experiments at the same time. And then the problem is that like when the game isn't working out the way you want it to, it's like, is it because this experiment failed or this one? Or is it that they're both fine, but the combination of them doesn't work in ways that are hard to predict? Like you just don't know. So every time you stack on another experiment, you're making it exponentially more likely to fail. This has been a very painful lesson for us many times.
Sorry, pal. But yeah, that's the same way. It's like when you balance a video game, right? Are you going to turn 3 knobs at a time to get your game balance right? It's the same thing, except on a much larger, more expensive scale.
Is there a, if you're going to choose one big experiment, is there a type that you've been gravitating towards? Is it like, well, if I'm really only getting one, if my budget is one experiment, I really want it to be the core game design, or I really want it to be the meta game, or I really want it to be the marketing. Like, what gets you up?
What gets me up?
Sorry, it wasn't. That was not intended to have sexual overtones. I meant up at night, up and out of bed. Well, you know.
My, it's getting a bit hot in here. I am getting a touch of the vapors, am I not? What gets me up is, honestly, none of the above.
Okay.
To be painfully honest, none of the above. I don't care about any of that. What gets me personally out of bed is the ability to connect with the audience. Okay. It doesn't matter whether it's the IP. It doesn't matter whether it's the mechanic. It doesn't matter what the monetization plan is. It's what it is. Yeah. It's none of that. It's, will people love it? Will people be affected by it? Will people talk about it the next day with their friends and say, you got to try this, or I had this experience? That's the only thing I truly care about from a from a game delivery point of view.
Yeah.
From a game making point of view, we're always making two games, at least at Harebrained Schemes, two things. There's two things. It's always, we're making a game and we're making the studio that makes the game.
Yeah.
And so both of these things are evolving. We take risks on both of these things, right? And so my life goal, honestly, is to create an environment where talented people can do the best work of their lives every single day, right? That's the goal. And it's easier to die happy that way because it's more under your control than will people like your game.
Yeah. You know, Mitch, related to this, when we were hanging out outside, you said something to me. You were saying that, you know, earlier in your career, your goal was to, I mean, you didn't use these exact words, but it was like, I want to change the world. I want to change the industry. I want to make the next Halo or whatever. Something
I wanted
like,
the next big thing.
The next big thing, right? And you said that as time has gone on, it's shifted to, I don't need to make the next big thing, but I want the people who play my game to say that they love it. I want them to use the word love. And
That's the most important thing.
That made me, I was delighted by that because I feel the same way, and I was wondering if you could say more about that? Help people understand why you've made that evolution?
Well, I've made games that people don't love, that's for one thing, and that sucks ass, so that's not good. But not to get all touchy-feely, the truth is that my life, Tom, you all right down there? You need me to get down there and give you a kiss of life or something? All right. The truth is that I have never, this isn't being recorded, is it?
I have no idea.
I've never been in the video game business to make money. I was a theater kid, and I was trained as a theater director, right? And theater direction is all about all of these different disciplines all coming together to create something together, right? That's what I was always about. And what I realized over time is that process of all of us coming together to make something together, please don't judge me on this, please, is an act of love, right? And I got lucky very, very early on in my life. I fell in love with the love of my life when I was a child. Like I was 18, and we're still together 35 years later. And so the through line of my entire life is giving and receiving love, as dumb as that may sound in a game business thing. And so when somebody says that they love my game, it's like, okay, success, I finally won. I struggled my entire adult life to figure out what success was. And I had a definition for a while, which was doing stuff that I wanted to do with people I wanted to do it with. And that was awesome. And it's actually evolved since then to simply finding every way I possibly could to give and receive love, because that's the thing that will last the longest. It's certainly not the money.
That's right.
We can blow through that, no problem. I've done it.
Well, it's one of those Maslow's hierarchy of needs things, right?
Yeah.
It's like you only need so much money to get yourself to the point where you can take care of your basic needs, and beyond that, all the research shows that it doesn't make you any happier. If you want to be happier, you have to have those meaningful ties.
Yeah. I used to work at Microsoft. That was cool. They paid a couple of bucks.
That's right.
And I wasn't happy.
No.
And then I was working for free at Harebrained Schemes, and I was just delighted because I was talking directly to the audience with my fingers, so to speak.
Actually, let's talk a little bit more about that. So you've had an experience that a lot of developers have never had, which is, you know, through the Kickstarters in particular.
Yeah.
You've really had to get down in the weeds with the community.
Yeah.
Talk to them very actively for many, many hours.
Yes.
You yourself directly.
Yes.
Sometimes having awkward conversations that were because they were angry about something or another.
Sure.
Like, what have you learned from that process? Is there anything that, like, it's like, hey, because I've done that for years, I can spare you some pain, you folks in the audience who haven't done that yet?
Yeah. Good question. Yeah, I can. The thing that made me as a human being successful with the Kickstarter audiences that I have, for lack of a better word, entertained, right, is being as honest and direct as I could. That's what they were missing. Yeah. That's what a lot of, at least American audiences, I sense, are missing. They feel like they're talking to faceless corporations that don't give a rat's ass about them. And when somebody looks them in the eye and says, and they say, hey, I really want you to add this feature to your game. Will you do that? Because I'll back you if you do that. And I say, no, I'm not adding that. That's wrong. Focus equals quality. If I do that, something else is going to give. And the vision for this game is this, and I'm not doing it. And they go, oh, okay, here's my money anyway, because that was a cool answer. And that's the thing. Honest, direct, timely feedback. You can't be 100% on that, that's for sure. But
Want to give us an example of a case where maybe you shouldn't be so honest?
No. No, what I mean is the case where I shouldn't be so honest, I haven't made that mistake.
Okay.
Oddly enough. Yeah, no, I haven't. I love doing Twitch streams with the audience. I love direct interaction with them where they can ask questions and I can answer at real time. That's probably my favorite thing, although I really like personal interaction, 1 to 12 on 1 with handshakes and eye contact. Or Kickstarter updates, I basically handcraft every one of those myself with a team of 3 or 4 people reading it to make sure I didn't screw up.
Right.
But no, it's the interaction with the audience. It goes back to that theater thing, right? Theater, is this ephemeral thing, and you've sort of succeeded by, do you get a standing ovation? Do you get a smattering of applause? What happens? Jordan and I often say we're performance artists in this. We're actually doing it for the applause. For some people, the applause comes in the form of money. That's how you know, but that's not very satisfying, for us anyway. It's more about hearing people's story about, and I've heard some amazing stories from people. It's like, Met Commander 1, it's like, man, I was 15 years old and my dad was dying and he just wanted to play games with me, and this is the game he and I played for the last summer of his life, and I will never be able to thank you enough for that. It's like, okay, that's it. That's the thing.
Yeah.
This is probably very different than the sort of conversation perhaps you thought we would have.
No, this is great.
Okay.
Actually, hold on. So, but I have a million more questions, but let's take one from the audience so I can get a sense of like where your heads are at. Does someone want to ask something to Mitch?
Anybody? Oh, it's
Okay,
gonna be
please.
like that, huh?
You said that you started hiring at 22. How did you give people the confidence that you were mature enough to do that?
Could you repeat the question?
I missed the very last part. How did you give them the confidence that what?
That you were mature enough to lead your own studio and hire.
Oh, all right. Well, at 22, I didn't have my own studio. My training ground actually to be a manager, and I was a manager before I was a game developer. Like, my life's calling actually is as a people manager. That's what I learned. I thought I wanted to be a game developer. It turns out I wanted to be a people manager, right? Who made games, right? And you could have that creativity. So where was the confidence come from? I was an arrogant little shit. That's the answer, really. And that doesn't really go away. Yeah, but it's confidence born of absolutely nothing. And I have 3 kids, and I can tell you, it must be genetic. Those little bastards, they're unbelievable. They think they can conquer the world, and I don't know where they get it from. Their mom does.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. That's great. Anyone else?
But wait, real fast about hiring, because there's a lot of hiring techniques. I used to be a management trainer, actually. I used to travel around the Midwest of the United States teaching people how to manage people, how to interview people.
I forgot about that.
And experience counts for some things, but that's never what I'm looking for, right? You're looking again for character. You're looking for, can they hang? Because you're going to be living together for 40 plus hours a week, especially if you crunch, right? And you have to have an environment where you can make good stuff. And you're looking for emotional intelligence, right? Which is something you don't usually think about when you're doing hiring. Can they collaborate? Do they have respect for their audience? Do they have respect for each other?
Yeah. What are your, because these things, some of the things that you're mentioning are notoriously difficult to check for in an interview process. Yeah. What are your tools for checking for that in an interview process?
As a general note, most interviewers will tell you, never ask for hypotheticals. You can't get anything out of a hypothetical, really. You can get some higher level thinking out of it, but what you're really looking for are stories, right? Tell me a story about a time when this happened. This is a pretty classic behavioral interviewing technique. And what you're looking for, you gotta get a genuine story, and there are techniques for doing that too. But just keep asking and probing with probing questions. So what was the name of the person you were talking to? When you said that, and when they don't know the answer, it's like, are you sure this story really happened? But anyway, by telling that story, by looking at their past behavior, you can help to predict their future behavior. And it's not so much what they talk about, it's you're looking for what they did in the circumstance, and then how they feel about that. That's one of the secrets that I do when I'm interviewing people, is I say, what did you learn in that circumstance? And that makes them go, right? They become that's right. They become very introspective for a minute. If you ask somebody, what did you learn from that experience? All of a sudden, you start to have a genuine conversation. And what you're looking for always throughout, hopefully, your entire game development experience, but especially when you're interviewing somebody, is a genuine conversation. So instead of coming in with a list of questions for them to answer and for you to tick through one at a time, it's about having a real conversation. And a lot of times I expose something about myself, careful now, more vapors, but it's exposing vulnerability in myself to get them to expose vulnerability in themselves.
Cool. So it really comes down to just, hey, I just want to talk to you as a human being. We're just going to go back and forth.
It turns
It's
out
not
that human
scripted.
being thing's kind of important.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah. I saw another question back. That guy's got his hand up. Look at it.
Oh, sure,
It
go
caught
for
the
it.
light. That's how I knew.
So you mentioned emotional intelligence not once but twice. I feel like I sort of know what that means, but I think you're referring to something very specific. So please explain what you mean by that.
Yeah, so what I mean by emotional intelligence, first of all, you're looking for empathy, right? The ability to put yourself in somebody else's shoes is critical, and if you, not to get political, but if you look around the country, you can see that may be one of the things lacking today. And it's hard. It's a hard life out there. It's cold out there, right? It is. And so looking for people that can bring some warmth, that can put themselves in the other person's shoes, so that when an engineer comes to me and says, you know, I can't code the feature the way that you designed it, that you're not looking back at them and say, you failed me again. Right? It's more like, well, tell me what the problem, you know, and having a real conversation with them, because that's where collaboration comes from, in my opinion anyway, is from the ability to put yourself in somebody else's shoes and really talk about the issue, not each other, right? It's not about you. It's not about your attitude or anything like that. It's about this problem that we have for the audience, and how are we going to solve that for the audience. And if you're a game developer, right, and you're creating experiences for people, if you don't have empathy, how do you know that you're making an experience that's going to actually touch them in some way, or help them, or make them feel a certain way, or even keep them, you know, to use a business term, sticky with your game?
Yeah.
You know, I learned that at Microsoft, by the way. Sticky, huh? Nice. Okay. I hope that answered your question. Good.
Yeah, that's great. Did anyone? I'm ready to take back over the fireside chat. But did anyone else have their hand up that I missed? Oh, you did. Hey, Jose, go for it, man.
Hi.
Hi, Mitch.
Uh-oh.
You mentioned something to me a couple of weeks ago that I think would be really useful for people to kind of like understand, because you helped me so much, right?
Cheers.
When you have a wound, right? Like something happened, you made a mistake, or you have something in your career that's like, hey, like you mentioned, right? The decision.
Yeah, sliding doors or something like that. Yeah, yeah.
Like, could you elaborate on a little bit more on how to deal with that?
How to deal with the wounds, how to deal with your scar tissue. Yeah. I wonder what I said to you that helped you. I'm glad it did, man.
I think it was the whiskey.
I'm glad what? Oh, it's the whiskey? Yeah. By the way, I have one management tool that I want to pass along to you that is wrong for you, and it's bad for your health, and it's not whiskey. It's not whiskey. But I smoke cigars very regularly, and it helps me dramatically. I like to get outside of the studio with people, take walks, right? Let's go take a walk, because people think differently outside the box that they're sitting in, right? It's just, that's just the nature of it. And so the excuse is, let's smoke about it, right? And then there's that moment where you're clipping it and you're lighting it, and they're starting to formulate what they want to talk about and that kind of thing. And then you can have that sort of genuine conversation. Works like a charm with my kids. Holy crap. So, by the way, real fast, here's how it works. You take a walk for the kid. This will work for game developers too, where you just take a walk and you just say something like, hey, how you doing? And then they just start talking. right? And they're talking. And you go, uh-huh, 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 and they keep talking. Uh-huh, uh-huh, and they keep talking because you're engaged, right? Yeah, uh-huh, uh-huh, and they keep talking. And then all of a sudden, they're out of the bullshit and into, so here's the problem I'm really having. But they had to get through that to get there. What Jose was talking about is, at a certain age, I realized that age is about simply having more memories than other people, right? Like, I just have a higher quantity of them, right? And therefore, you could say you have more experience to draw on. Another way of putting it is I've made way more mistakes. And some of those mistakes are really painful. You know, Dave and I, before we came up here, were chatting, and he hit a nerve, man. I don't remember which one it was. Oh, yeah, I do. No, I do. Hopefully I don't break on stage or anything. But that happens, and you get crisscrossed with these invisible scars, and how you deal with those is so damn important, and it's all about learning. Please, please, I beg of you, don't be afraid to fail. Because, of course, like, one of those successories things. If you're not trying, you're not failing, right? Or if you're not failing, you're not trying, all that kind of stuff. I've actually never been afraid of failure, which probably is why I've failed so many times and so big. And I mean big, like $30 million worth of big, right? The good news is my partner, who is also one of my very best friends, has also failed that big with both his money and other people's money. And it's a bonding thing, and it makes you realize that you can rise above an awful lot. And I think that's the key. But, time heals, but you got to accept that, that it's going to take that time, and allow yourself to feel the wound. It's okay to feel things, Don't wallow in it. A lot of times for me, I give myself 24 hours. Like, I'm going to feel really shitty for 24 hours, and then I'm going to light one and go back to work.
Yeah, it's funny. There's been a lot of, conversely, we'll have situations where, we just launched a game, right? And you know how it is. Particularly the first day that you launch a game, all productivity is gone.
Yeah, you're just watching the internet all day
everyone
long.
is watching the internet. It doesn't, whether their jobs require them to do that or not, it doesn't matter. They're just glued to Twitter, checking every tweet. And for the longest time, that would drive me insane. And now I'm like, you know what? That's fine. That's just part of it's like a ritual. That's part of the human ritual. You spent a year or 2 years or 3 years, however long, working on this thing. You now get a day to be completely fucking useless.
Yes.
And that's okay. That's totally okay. That's, in fact, a good thing.
It's a great thing, and I'm glad you brought that up, because you learn when you ship. People that do this analysis paralysis thing and just keep it to themselves and don't ship can't learn, right? All you're doing is you're talking to your echo chamber of the other people in your studio or whatever. We've, at Harebrained Schemes, if you check our website, you'll see we take that ritual of, yes, we're going to spend the entire day looking, but we add cigars and whiskey.
Nice.
And so you'll see, we're all out there, out front, everybody's checking their phones and smoking and just going, yeah, well, we're going to do it together now.
Is the whole Harebrained studio at this point cigar smoking? What's
one day, one day. Yeah, one day.
You're
no, it's
working
just
on
me.
them. Okay.
It's just me.
Okay.
But yeah, it's terrible. Yeah, role model.
Nice.
Whatever. But
Nice.
ritual is important. I love ritual.
Do you guys have any other cool rituals?
Probably, but they're probably illegal. I don't know. No, there are no. No, not that. Yeah. Oh, thank you, pal. Oh, you don't know what I was going to say. No, I can't think of any other ritual. It's mostly shipping because it's the most important thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, so there were a few fans of BattleTech in here, so we should have at least one quick conversation about BattleTech. Was there something super interesting about BattleTech that we should talk about? About the development.
Well, we were talking before about the idea of making an original thing versus
a licensed IP.
A licensed IP or worse, in this case, a licensed venerable IP. BattleTech's been around for 35 years. I think our game, and I'm not sure if you've heard of BattleTech, some of you, but you may have heard of Mech Warrior.
Yeah.
Right, so it's been in video games before it started with Crescent Hawks was Inception of Revenge, and then the Mech Commander games, and Mech Warrior 1, 2, 3, 4, coming up 5 from another studio, and Mech Assault, etc. And so that's a pretty venerable IP. As a result, there's an audience that comes with it right? That's easy to offend,
Yes.
right? And that's a big deal. And the question, and I have made perhaps one of the most critical mistakes. I don't know if you've ever heard of Shadowrun, but I've made 4 Shadowrun games. 3 were RPGs that were very well received and loved by the audience. One was a first-person shooter that the core audience absolutely hated. And yet it was a good game. It was an innovative game, of course. You know, got to take a risk somewhere, or 3, or whatever. And it had no single-player campaign, even though it was this big, you know, IP with a lot of backstory and lore and stuff. So the mistake in the first place with the Shadowrun first-person shooter was not respecting your audience, not respecting their love of the IP, not respecting the IP in the first place. And that's why there have been so many Spider-Man movies or Captain America movies that never caught on. Why? Because they didn't respect it. Once you get real Captain America out there, big Chris Evans fan, by the way.
Yeah.
Once you start respecting your audience, all of a sudden, and it's not just their groundswell, it's like the audience can feel the respect for the property.
Yep.
And then it feels genuine. It doesn't feel like this
it's
bullshit
no longer a
thing
licensed cash grab.
Yeah, that's right. So that's what I've learned about working with license is you can make a really good game and respect the license, the legacy, the IP. It's like, can you imagine making a Star Wars game and when Luke goes to blow up the Death Star, you know, he uses a positronic torpedo? No, right? No, you don't do that. You're changing history, right? And they're like, yeah, but it's bullshit. It's just backstory, and you know, it's lore. No, it's not. It's history. It's the history of the Star Wars universe.
Yeah.
Don't screw with that. I mean, that's just, I guess it's not rocket science to us, hopefully, but to
And you're
people,
saying more than just respect the facts. You're saying respect the spirit behind the facts.
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. So that's what I've learned about working with licensed IPs and big, venerable games, you know, an IP.
Cool. Okay, but so another question about BattleTech is, so you made it, and it did
I
well.
agree. Yeah, it's true.
And people like it. And
Get
that's
to make
great,
more of it.
And you get to make more of it. Are
Yeah.
you excited about making more of it?
I'm excited enough that I took over the game myself as game director, yeah.
Nice. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, that reminds me. So let's talk a little bit about that. So you've told me repeatedly that, like, you adore being a game director. That is the #1 thing you want to do, you want to be. Like, what do you think makes you so suited for that? And I'm asking not just to give you a chance to puff up your chest, but specifically
please.
to
Yeah,
hopefully
that's a
give
great
other
idea.
folks.
Yeah, let's get back to that arrogance thing for a minute.
Nice.
Again, I was a directing student in
Yeah.
college, and that was really a real passion. And being a directing student and wanting to collaborate with, you know, the set designers, the costume designers, the lighting designers. I mean, everybody thinks it's just you and the actor. It's so much more than that,
Yeah.
including front of the house, et cetera. And the audio, the sound designers, and the music. I fell in love with that very, very early.
Yeah.
Then I realized, wow, I'm never going to get rich doing that. Or it was not rich. It was, I wanted a family.
Yeah.
And I wanted to support my family, and I didn't feel I could do that. I didn't want to live hand to mouth. Little did I know that when you open your own game studio, that's what you're doing. But whoops, I should have flashed forward 25, 30 years to find that out. So being a game director means treating people the way they deserve to be treated, that they need to be treated. And that was a huge thing for me. It still is.
Are there any specific techniques, though? Like, whether they came from your time as a theater guy or otherwise? Like, what are some of the techniques that you use to do that?
The single greatest thing that I have learned comes from theater and management. They're the same thing. And that is listening is the #1 skill that I've developed, right? Listening to the audience. That doesn't, sorry, there's listening and there's hearing, right? So the audience will say this stuff to you, but what are they really trying to tell you? What's under that? What's the real problem statement that you're trying to pull out of that to solve or whatever?
It sounded like one of the things you were saying is just give them a lot of time because it might take them a while to get to their point. You were saying earlier that you need to give them time to just pratter on.
It's true. So yeah, listening is a big part of it. And you know, people talk about an open door policy, but that doesn't mean they actually have one. You know, it's like you could tell me anything, but please don't because I'm going to get grumpy, or You know, I mean,
Right.
there's so many ways you can do that too.
Right.
So, yeah, game direction for me is a big passion, and what I learned over time is, yeah, I don't want to do anything else, and I've been miserable not doing, truly miserable. Being a game executive sounds really cool. You know, you get to wear business casual and stuff like that. My wife picked out this shirt, by the way. But yeah, it's just so unrewarding for me personally. You guys see Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan? You probably heard of that one, right? And Spock says to Kirk, you never should have let him take you off of the bridge of a starship. When I saw that movie, it was re-released last year before, I cried in the movie theater. Like, holy crap, there's a lesson in Star Trek for me. So that's where we are today.
Cool. All right, so now Paradox owns Harebrained Schemes, and
True.
this is not the first time you've worked essentially under the umbrella of a bigger publisher.
Right,
Obviously,
right.
Microsoft is a
Yeah,
perfect
yeah,
example.
absolutely.
This is not the second time, but it's a different context. Anyway, like, I'm curious, are there unique ways in which you need to function in that context that you didn't have to before that you can share with us that maybe people can learn from?
Surprisingly, yes. I actually learned something from my time at Microsoft. I used to think when I was at Microsoft, and very, very wrongly, by the way, I think, that I was the shit shield for my studio. That everything that happened outside of my studio was some corporate asshole trying to screw with my team, screw with my project, and ultimately would ruin us. And I spent a great deal of energy defending, putting up walls around the studio. And it turns out that I was surrounded by brilliant people actually trying to do good, but I was not listening to them from defensiveness. Right? So I took that learning and am applying it to Paradox, and it turns out it's very, very easy to do. Now, sure, there are corporate stooges everywhere that are going to try and screw with you. A lot of times, you know, people have their own motivations for what they're doing that has nothing to do with the greater good.
Yep.
One of the reasons why we sold the company to Paradox and why I'm so happy about it is because philosophically we believe in everything. Their management philosophy is the same way. They treat their people the same way. All that listening and respect crap, they just do. They don't even talk about it the way I'm doing now. It's just their natural state, thank goodness. And so when I'm on a conference call, as I was at 8 o'clock this morning with Sweden, and somebody says, hey, I want to talk to you about this idea, it's met with open ears and an open heart, because I really believe that they're just trying to do the right thing for the game and for the company. And so that collaboration is not internal only, it's going across the ocean as well. And I think that's the greatest thing, it's just accepting what they're saying at face value, you know, until they've proven otherwise. You know, it's that whole Russian thing, the trust and verify, you know, attributed to Ronald Reagan, who was quoting the Russians. But anyway, it's like that.
You mentioned, you know, so speaking of being a shit shield, it's interesting to hear you say that you took it too far, but I'm sure there are times that you probably felt like it was a good idea to be a shit shield, and I'm wondering, you know, maybe you can give us a little insight.
At Microsoft, you know, you have these badges that are also key cards that get you in the door. And at one point, I was so pissed off with our marketing department, I had gone through 9 different marketers. Wow. And it felt like a revolving door.
Wait, on one project?
No, but it was over the course of 2 or 3. I mean, just like,
wow.
it felt like a revolving door of marketers.
Yeah.
Such that I stopped referring to them by name and I started referring to them only by number. I warned you, there's a lot of hard-won lessons here. But one guy who I actually liked, I called Ocho. Right? But yeah, by the time I got to, like, you know, Cinco or something, like, all right, you're Cinco, and then, you're number 5, you're number 6, you're number 7.
Yeah.
Finally, I got to number 8. I'm like, all right, you're good. And then, of course, I lost him. But at some point, I became so pissed off with marketing that I turned off their key cards. They couldn't come into my studio at all.
Wow. And was that effective?
Yes, they did not actually enter the studio. Worked like a charm. Didn't get fired either, so that's a good news. But yeah,
that's good.
hard-fought lessons, how not to defend a studio.
So I mean, you don't have Microsoft's marketing muscle. It sounds like in some ways that's a blessing. But anyway, you don't have Microsoft's marketing muscle now. What do you do as an indie studio to try to get, and obviously licensing IP is one of them. Fine.
Yeah,
okay.
that helps.
That's a given, but let's put that aside.
It helps that your partner's made most games that people have heard of. Yeah, that's nice.
That's a big one too.
HeroClix too, and stuff like that. Yeah.
So for the folks who don't have those things going for them, like what can they do? Because I'm sure half the people in this room are like, how the hell do I get anyone to notice my games?
Oh God, I wish I knew. I'm sorry. There's certainly no magic bullet that I can talk about. I think it's a matter of a couple things. Putting features in your game that cause people to compare their games to other people's games so that they're talking about it. Trying to create some sort of water cooler moment so that they're talking about it. The thing I learned from the head of, who did Don't Starve? Help me out.
Oh, Jamie Chang.
Jamie Chang, CEO Jamie Chang, he said, I don't spend any money on marketing, right? He puts all the effort into making a game that people are constantly talking about. Because one of the things I've learned a long time ago, it's not advertising, it's not about anything. People make buying decisions based on word of mouth, right? By a trusted friend telling you, dude, this is the game for you, right? And so keeping people talking about your game is the number one thing, and finding things for them to talk about is the number one thing. And that's what I'm doing actually with BattleTech now. We're doing live development. So every other month we put out a new release with new features for free, and then every 6 months we put out a paid expansion. Seems like a decent model. We're going with that for now and see what happens. And so I just put out a feature, a memorial wall for your mech warriors, the pilots of these giant robots that die, and it tells how many missions they flew and stuff like that, and how they died, and some of them are pretty funny, a misadventure in a giant robot, to allow them to say, look, this is what happened to my guy, my mech warrior, and what about yours? Oh, she died over here, so that there's something to talk about. That was it's not rocket science. Other games do this kind of stuff, but that's the motivation for adding some of those things. Just more things to talk about. But I think the best way to get your game marketed is to make a really good one.
Yeah. Well, of course, everyone's trying that, so it's that.
Yeah, I know. Like I said, I don't have much in the way of wisdom to share there.
But I like Jamie's quote is a good one. Right?
Yeah,
it's like, how do you make a game that people actually want to talk about? Not just play, but talk about with other people.
Yeah.
Okay, so we don't have a lot of time. I think we have like 5 minutes or something. 5 minutes? Okay, so since there's only 5 minutes, I'm going to give the folks in the audience one more chance to ask. Go for it.
Talk about the transition with Paradox and acquisition and all that.
The transition with Paradox, like what's happening? Well, Paradox is a Swedish publisher. I think they're number 5 on Steam, something like that. They do Europa Universalis, Stellaris, grand strategy games. And they're branching out into other things like role-playing game, turn-based tactical games like BattleTech. The transition for us has been very lucky. The reason why they wanted to acquire us in the first place is because we think alike. So there wasn't much there to worry about.
Nice.
And then I remember their CEO flew out to Seattle as we were talking about it. We were in the real final stages, and we talked about, all right, governance. Let's talk about governance. And he's like, how about we talk on the phone once in a week? Yep, that's it. And that's what we do. Every Tuesday morning, we talk. He's at home, and we're in the office. Or one time I actually got caught. I can't tell the story, never mind.
Use your imaginations.
I was tinkling, and I forgot to mute the phone. So with my new boss from Sweden.
Nice. I bet that was a bonding moment.
It actually was.
Yeah.
It was like, are you tinkling? Yes, I am. And this is part of the transition that we're talking about here. And so the vice president of product development came out, lived at the studio for a week, didn't say anything, just shadowed people around, went to meetings, was a fly on the wall. It was pretty interesting. He's a former Army Ranger, so he's really kind of intimidating, like scary. He's got those eyes. But he just sat around, and then he took the whole studio out for dinner. It's like, great, thanks. It was really nice talking to you guys and stuff. And then the next day, he gave a talk to the entire studio, right, all at once. And this was perhaps the hardest thing for me personally. One of the hardest things actually in my life, because I just spent this past 7 years creating this culture, creating these games, and now, there's this new daddy coming in that's going to address the troops, and I don't know what this guy's going to say, right?
Yeah.
And it's just this moment of, here we go. And he said all the right things, luckily.
Nice.
Just like, been a fly on the wall, here's what I see, here's how I see you guys make decisions. They're the same way that we make them here. I have really nothing to add. There's nothing we want to change. We're very, very, very lucky, right? Extremely lucky. And he said, look, here's the deal. We're going to give you guys a lot of rope. And you're either going to use it to climb to the next level or you're going to hang yourself. Good luck. And the studio loved it. Like, all right, cool, that's what we're used to. What's the difference? Except we've never had rope before. We were an indie. We lived hand to mouth.
floss.
Yeah. Good Lord. Is there something going on overhead? Yeah, so that's the deal. The transition has been extremely smooth. Nothing to talk about, and really weird. And I'd like to knock on wood as soon as I find some.
Nice.
Yeah.
All right, that is all of our time.
Thanks
you,
for your
Mitch.
time.
That was great.